I think we're live. Let me check. Let's see. Cool. All right. Here we go. First video we're watching here, how JP Morgan built an AI agent for investment research with LangGraph. This should be interesting to hear because I've been seeing something on X about the Visa. Yeah, I think the Visa CEO, said something about creating an AI agent to do something similar to, I guess, maybe what's going on here, like spending and things like that. Let's see.
Good morning, everyone. Really thrilled to be here today at the Interrupt conference. A big thank you to the organizers for putting together such a great event and for inviting us to be able to share our journey with you today. My name is David. I'm here with my colleague Jane from the JP Morgan Private Bank. So at the Private Bank, we're part of the investment research team. And this is the team that's responsible for curating and managing lists of investment products and opportunities for our clients. Now, when I talk about lists, we're not talking about a few dozen or a few hundred products. We're talking about thousands of products, each backed by many years of very valuable data. So when you have such extensive lists of diverse products, questions are inevitable. And when there's a question, our small research team needs to go find some answers. So we go digging around databases, materials, files, and we piece together answers for the questions that come across our desks each and every day.
See, oh man, the stupid ad.
Why can't I make any changes without an admin approval? Why?
With Monday.com.
Now, not only
All right.
piece together.
So this right here seems like a pretty solid framework to use when you want to create your own agent or just automation, because they're describing their type of business, they're describing the challenge that they have, and then the desired outcome that they want. How could they get there? Or what should their goal be, right? And they discovered, all right, well, we want to automate. And so the goal is to automate this portion of it, but we have to reverse engineer and build up, however. But anyway, yeah, this is a good framework, I think, to begin building your automations. JP Morgan cheat code.
Answers to the questions that come across our desks each and every day. Now, not only is this a very manual and time-consuming process, but this limits our ability to scale, and it really makes it difficult for us to really provide insights into the products that we have on our platform. So as a group, we got together, we challenged ourselves. We said, let's come up with a way to automate the investment research process, aiming to deliver precise and accurate results. Today, when you have a question, you come to me. You come to David, and David will give you an answer. But tomorrow, you'll be able to go ask David, our AI-powered solution designed to transform the way we answer investment questions.
Wow. So they have several different agents. I wonder what this means right here. The agent 1, 2, 3. So I understand this, ask David. Okay, so no, never mind. That was kind of stupid, right? These are the people. Unless it's all just one thing. I don't know.
With Ask David, we're aiming to provide curated answers, insights, and analytics delivered to you as quickly as you can ask a question. Now, I know you're all probably asking yourselves, David, are you going to just put yourself out of a job? Not quite. What we're doing is we're building a tool to make our jobs easier and much more efficient. The stakes here are high. Billions of dollars of assets are at risk, and we're committed to building a tool that not only meets but also exceeds the expectations of all of our stakeholders. Looking to the future, we're really excited about all the possibilities that Ask David potentially brings to the table. So now, to dive deeper into the technical magic behind Ask David, I'll turn it over to Jane, who will walk you through the nuts and bolts of how we are making our vision a reality. And she might even let you in on what Ask David stands for, because I promise you, I didn't name this after myself. Thank you.
Thank you, David. So Ask David is a domain-specific QA agent. So let's start with domain knowledge analysis. First of all, we have decades of structured data. Those are the backbones of many up and running production systems. Prior to the introduction of an agent, users have access to the same data, but they have to navigate through different systems and manually syndicate the information. An agent can introduce efficiency and integrated user experience. Next, we have unstructured data. As a bank, we manage a vast amount of documentations, including emails, meeting notes, presentations. With the rise of virtual meetings, we also have increasing amount of video and audio recordings. How do we make full use of that information? The advancement of LLM really bringing tremendous opportunity in this area. Lastly, as a research team, we have proprietary models and analytics, which are designed to really derive insights and visualization to help decision making. Previously, it will require a human expert to conduct this kind of analysis and offering white glove service. With the help of an agent, we can scale the insight generation and we can make our service available to more of our clients. Now imagine being a financial advisor in a client meeting and your client suddenly bring up a fund and ask you why it's terminated. Believe me, it's actually a very loaded question. So in the past, you would reach out to our investment research team, talk with real David, and then you figure out what's the status change history of the fund and what's the reason behind it, what's the research about this fund, what are similar funds, how do I curate this answer specific for this client, and you will come up with that presentation yourself, manually. With the help of an agent, we can get access to the same data, analytics, insights, and visualization right in your meeting, enable the real-time decision-making. That is our vision of Ask David, and you probably guessed it. David stands for Data, Analytics, Visualization, Insights, and Decision-Making Assistant.
Nope, did not guess that.
So this is our approach to build up Ask David, which is a multi-agent system. Starting from our supervisor agent, which acts as the orchestrator, it talks with our end user, understand their intention, and try to delegate the task to one or more of sub-agents in the team. The supervisor agent have access to both short-term and long-term memories so that it can customize the user experience. It also
See, that also makes a lot of sense to me, the way that this is being structured and the way people will be interacting with these as opposed to replacing jobs necessarily, just changing careers. So basically, like, you have this big connected system of agents and automations that would need to be also made more efficient as time goes on, because I'd imagine you'd need less and less connections to make things happen, because that's like a big issue right now. It's not necessarily a big issue, but in order to create some of these advanced automations or have a really impressive AI agent, there's just this long string of nodes, similarly to like coding, where, you know, the more efficient the code, I believe, I'm not a coder, that means that the more efficient the code, the less line of codes there is, or there are. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but I think if that's the case there, then it would also be the case that the less nodes there are, the more efficient the automations will be. So that's going to be easy. Not easy, interesting to see how that develops and if that's kind of how this works.
also knows when to invoke human in the loop to ensure the highest level of accuracy and also reliability. Next, we have our structured data agent. It will translate the natural language into either SQL queries or API calls, and it will use large language model to summarize the data on top. Unstructured data is a little bit different from structured data. Usually, it requires some kind of pre-process. But as long as you save it, vectorize it, put it into a database, we can employ a RAG agent on top to effectively derive information. Lastly, we have the analytics agent. We talked about our proprietary model and APIs. They are usually in the format of APIs or programming libraries. For a simple query that can be directly answered by API calls, we'll use a React agent and use APIs as tools.
And I think that there's a big opportunity in that. Maybe I'm wrong, but the different agents that are in the system as a whole, they have different purpose. They have different reason, right? So they're being used differently. So people in that particular realm would probably have an easier time creating the agents and specializing that, because there's data entry, but what happens when you don't need to do data entry, but you need to maybe train on data structuring, data prioritization, so that's a whole nother skill set there. And then I think that these different kind of agents will, for maybe a while, maybe not, require people to specialize in. Maybe they won't. Maybe that's why Sam Altman said the future is for the generalists, because the generalists will be able to create these kind of automations without having specialists for those particular things. I don't know. Just a thought.
But for more complex queries, we'll use text-to-code generation capabilities and use human supervision for the execution.
Book on dollar.com to get our lowest rates.
Why are you in my house?
I went here for undergrad and I fell in love with Akron. I work full time, also a mom, so it has been very helpful with the
This graph is our end-to-end workflow. It's starting with a planning node. And you probably notice there are two subgraphs over here. One is a general QA flow. So for any questions, for any general questions, for example, how do I invest in gold? It will go to the left-hand side subgraph. And if the question is regarding specific funds, you will go to the right-hand side flow. Each of the flow, as you can see, are equipped with one supervisor agent and a team of specialized agents. Once we retrieve the answer, you probably notice there's one node to personalize the answer and another node to do the reflection check. I will explain it in detail in an example to follow. The whole flow ends with summarization. So now back to our client question. Why was this fund terminated? This is how our agent can handle it. So as you can see on the right-hand side, the agent answer was the fund was terminated due to a performance issue. And you can actually click into the reference link to see more about the fund performance and the reason behind it. What really happened behind the thing? From that planning node, we start to understand this user inquiry is related to a specific fund, so it goes to the specific fund flow. And in the supervisor agent inside will be able to extract the fund information as a context and understand that actually the doc search agent is the right one to solve the problem. Once doc search agent get that information, it starts to trigger the tools underneath to get the data from MongoDB. Once we retrieve that information, the data and the information will be personalized. The same information can be presented in different ways, depends on who is asking. For example, we are talking about the fund termination reason over here. A due diligence specialist may demand a very detailed answer, while an advisor maybe just need a general answer. So this personalization node will tailor the answer based on the user roles. Next, we have the reflection node. It uses LLM Judge to make sure that the answer we generated makes sense. If it doesn't, what do? We try again. So the last one, the whole flow ends with summarization. In the summarization node, we do several things. We summarize the conversation, we update the memory, and we return the final answer. So it was quite a journey working on this multi-agent application, and we are very excited to share the lesson learned. Number one, start simple and refactor often. I know I showed you a fairly complex diagram earlier, but we didn't really focus on building that diagram from day one. So day one, if you can see, is a plain vanilla React agent. We try to understand how it works. And from there, we need to work on the specialized agent on the picture 2, which actually is a RAG agent, if you can see. We start to customize the flow. But once we get very comfortable with the performance of the specialized agent, we start to integrate that into our multi-agent flow in picture 3 with a supervisor. And in the picture 4, that's our current stats. we actually have the subgraph generated for specific kind of intentions. Right now, we only have 2 intentions, but we can scale easily with this architecture. So I talked about fast iterations, but how do we know every iteration we're moving towards the right direction? The answer is evaluation-driven development. So everyone knows that compared to the traditional AI projects, Gen AI projects actually has a shorter development phase, but we do have a long evaluation phase, right? So our suggestion is to start early, think about the metrics, what kind of a goal you want to achieve, right? As we are in financial industry, obviously accuracy is one of the most important things. And the continuous evaluation help you gain that confidence you're improving day by day. So there are additional tips I have over here based on our own experience of evaluation. As you can see on the screen, right? So the dark blue bars over here are coming from the metrics of evaluation on our main flow. And the green one is actually one example of our sub-agent. So my tip number 1 is make sure you independently evaluate your sub-agents. But the key for your evaluation is to find places to improve, right? These help you figure out what's a weak link to improve your accuracy. Second point is depends on how you design your agents. Make sure you pick the right metrics. So if you have a summarization, you may want to check whether your summarization is concise or not. So conciseness is one of the metrics you want to pick. If you are doing a to-call, maybe you can have the trajectory evaluation instead.
If you want to learn how to edit really well from professional Hollywood editors, we're going to show you the stuff that nobody else is teaching.
So there is a common myth. I think, especially if you're a developer, you're talking about TDD. I think a lot of people are saying, I just don't do that. It's a lot of work, right? But it's not the same in the evaluation. You actually can start evaluation with or without ground truth. It doesn't matter. There are so many metrics beyond just accuracy, and each one of them will provide you some insight. And you know what? Once you start doing evaluation, you will have review. Once you start doing review, you're actually going to accumulate more for the ground truth examples. Lastly, we have large language model itself as judge in combination of a human review. These automatic solutions really help us scale without adding too much burdens to our human SME to review large amount of AI-generated answers. Talking about SME, our last lesson learned over here is about human SME in the loop. When you apply a general model to a specific domain, usually you will get less than 50% of accuracy. So, but you can do a quick improvement like chunking strategies. You can change your searching algos, and you can actually making proper engineering. That can get you to that 80% mark. From 80 to 90, we are using the workflow chains. We are creating the subgraphs so that we can fine-tune certain kind of questions without impacting each other.
I don't know what she said for that.
Between 90, if you are doing a to-call, maybe you can have the trajectory evaluation instead.
I'm working on 2 things at a time.
So there is a common myth. I think, especially if you're a developer, you're talking about TDD. I think a lot of people are saying, I just don't do that. It's a lot of work, right? But it's not the same in the evaluation. You actually can start evaluation with or without ground truth. It doesn't matter. There are so many metrics beyond just accuracy, and each one of them will provide you some insight. And you know what? Once you start doing evaluation, you will have review. Once you start doing review, you're actually going to accumulate more for the ground truth examples. Lastly, we have large language model itself as judge in combination of a human review. These automatic solutions really help us scale without adding too much burdens to our human SME to review large amount of AI-generated answers. Talking about SME, our last lesson learned over here is about human SME in the loop. When you apply a general model to a specific domain, usually you will get less than 50% of accuracy. So, but you can do a quick improvement like chunking strategies. You can change your searching algos, and you can actually making proper engineering. That can get you to that 80% mark. From 80 to 90, we are using the workflow chains. We are creating the subgraph so that we can fine-tune certain kind of questions without impacting each other. Between 90% and 100%, that's what we call the last mile. And the last mile is always the hardest mile. In terms of GenAI applications, it may not be achievable to get that 100% mark, right? So what do we do? So human SME in the loop is very important to us because we have $1 billion at stake, and we cannot afford inaccuracy. In other words, Ask David still consults with real David whenever needed.
I mean, that makes a lot of sense what she's saying too, because if you think about it, manufacturers, they're able to produce, certain tools and different objects at very precise levels. Like they're very, very precise. Even then, you need quality control. There's no real getting away from that. You need human intervention in some way to make sure the machines are doing their jobs to the best of their ability. And then we just kind of enhance that. Similarly, the new machines are going to be digital, maybe then physical again, they're interweaving with each other. We're going to need to be there to fine tune, right?
In conclusion, 3 takeaways for you. Iterate fast, evaluate early, keep human SME in the loop. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Cool. That was cool. So see, she's saying keep humans in the loop. Now it could just be make everybody feel good, but I tend to think not. All right. Next video. Beyond leaderboards, LM Arena's mission to take on AI reliably. Let's see what we got here.
It sounds like what Arena is humanity's real-time exam.
Yeah, that's a good way.
That's a very well.
Sometimes I get asked, what's the last exam that AI should take, for humanity? And it seems like that's the wrong question to ask. We should be asking, what's the real-time exam you want your AIs to be taking before they get deployed every hour, every second of the day, especially as we start to get, I think one of the things that's emerging for me is that one of the Arena is misunderstood partly because we're just early in AI. And so while benchmarks like MMLU and the idea of these static exams were useful 3 years ago, the future is about real-time evaluation, real-time systems, real-time testing in the wild. Now, one thing that concerns a lot of people is the reliability of these systems when we start going from chatbots that are good at, let's say, companionship and more consumer use cases to mission-critical systems, defense, healthcare, financial services. How will Arena have to evolve as we go beyond companionship or web dev to those kinds of mission-critical use cases?
I think that's one of the very reason we wanted to create a company to support this project to, further scale them. So right now we are at 1 million monthly user now. What if we scale it to 5 to 10 or even more to capture even more diverse user base across different industries? And then in that case, we'll have the ability to really zoom in into all these different kind of areas that people really care about, that for critical mission task that it will be used to.
You can imagine when we are going to scale, we can have microsize for nuclear physicists, radiologists, and so forth, right? And these experts are going to come there to get the best answers to their, again, research questions.
So that's interesting. Is there a future where now that Arena is becoming a company, you could see a scientific lab or a shipping company or a defense company deploy their own Arena on their own infrastructure for their own users, for their own prompts?
Yeah,
essentially.
Many people have asked us for this already.
So these would be sort of private arenas.
Yeah,
private evaluation.
And it's worth saying, I think when people...
I'm going to pause this. I got to finish this workflow. I don't know if I can put it on here or not. I don't want to dox anybody on accident. But, yeah. So, here's what I'll do for now. This would be like a work with me. No. I don't know. I don't know what I can show you on this or not. But anyway, that's what I'm going to be working on right now because I need to get it done. Yeah, you know, I can just show it to you. All right, so now I think this is showing. So this is me working on this workflow here that I've created. I was going to go high level and do it, but then I thought, you know, I could just kind of rearrange one of the agents I currently have to handle this for me. So that's what I'm going to do. So I took this. That's the original instruction for it. And now I'm going to go into ChatGPT. Let me change this down a little bit. /live building. See, I didn't want to do like live streams on live building, but I have to do this. I need to get it done. So anyway, so we can just start from scratch. Let's see. There we go. All right. Workflow NAN. We want to change its original instructions from this to something more aligned with messaging. Podcast guest. Plus updating Google Sheet. An AI assistant designed to help coordinate podcast guest communication, schedule Telegram, Google, and Google Calendar. Yeah, that seems good. All right, so we'll just take this. All right, because I really just need to kind of get this out of here. I really, really do. Oh, I think I got to take this right here. Let's go back to this. We're back in NAN. Just put that down there. Okay. Cool. We got that. So that's good. Now I need to change this Google Sheet. All right, so let me just do this. Maybe this isn't the most efficient way to do it, but go over here to Tools, Google Sheet. Get rows. Yeah, I think that's what we want. Podcast guest. I think that's good. See, so that I shouldn't have to touch. This, I think, needs fixed. So once again, maybe I'm not doing it the best way. Let me just make sure this is all. Yeah, we'll save that. Let me just make sure we got the right one set up here. Okay. This one is the owner. Huh. Dang, that kind of sucks. So we'll go to this one. I can probably create a credential, right? Yeah, I can do this. Need set up. I see. Yeah, that's it. I don't think I want to do it manually. Let me see. I gotta test it. All right, there we go. Let's see if I can do this. No. Damn. We're gonna test this again. Send. No, I think it's gonna work fine. So then I also wanted to send an email to me. Maybe I'm not doing this the best way. Just kind of playing around. Send message. So I was going to send a message to this. Update. I don't know if this is going to work or not. against this. All right, maybe I'm not going to do that. Because I should just be able to get an update right on Telegram. Okay, now let's figure out how we're going to structure this show. Work. Let's see. There we go. See? All right. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to go Dom first. It's tough. I don't know who should go next. I think it should go Dom, Dan, Godwin, Joe, let's go Tam, and then we have, let's go Steven. Okay. Then we'll go Aki. So then we'll go Alex. We'll do Raz. 9th. Isaiah. Well, I don't know. We'll just try it. Okay. There we go. Let me see something here. Blessed. That's right. Blessed. Let's go back. All right. So blessed. $11th. Then we'll do Julia 12th. Okay. So that works. And then we will release them. So the podcast will come out June 6th. And then the next episode will be June 13th. So 6/13. 6/20. 6/27. July 4th. So 7/11. 7/18. 7/25. 8/1. 8:08, 8:15, 8:22. Okay. So, yeah, it's a little more than 2 months of content right there. It's like 3 months of content. So that's the whole summer for you. We got the whole summer on lock, baby. All right. Now I got to send this out. So hopefully this workflow works. You're going to see if it's another embarrassment or a great success. All right. Due to here, I'll actually do it on screen on Telegram. I didn't even think about that. Give me a second here. You guys will see it all. Let me pull up the Telegram. Telegram. All right. Yeah. Boom. Cool. Bring up the Telegram. There we go. Telegram, please. All right. Let's go in here. Can I share this? Let me see if I can share that. Let's see. Window. There we go. Boom. Cool. So I'm exposing myself. All right. So I'm in my Telegram. I want to pull up the this. All right. So that's all set up. Now here's what I'm going to do is I'm going to prompt this. I need you to send the following message to everyone in the Google Sheet for podcast guest via email. Here is what it must include. Hey, thank you for coming out the show. It was a pleasure to speak with you. Must say names, period. So thank you for coming on the show, and it was a pleasure speaking with them. And I look forward to connecting with them soon on some potential collaboration. Period. Then provide them this list of dates with names stating when the episode will be released. So let's go down. So first, Dom, episode is 6.3. Boom, bam. Six 23. Gotcha. 627. 627. 627. 620. All right. So 4. Alex. Raz 8 1. Man, I'm just trying to think of if there's a better way to do this, but we're already committed to it. There certainly is. Let's see how it does. I mean, it's active. Didn't even do anything. Execution is running. Let me see if this sent through a different email. Just want to make sure it worked. I see it all in there. I tried this the other day and it didn't work. No, it looks like it worked. Why is it doing that? I don't know. It worked though. I gotta correct that. But okay, cool. So you guys just watched me kind of do a poor automation. But we'll get out of that. We'll go back to watching some other stuff. Right? That's what we want. All right.
People have these mission critical industries in mind, they often are thinking about the sort of like factual nature of the responses and so on and so forth. But in reality, even in such industries, the majority of questions that people ask are subjective. Okay, so the mythology that in hard sciences or in mission critical industries, people just have like cut and dried questions and they just need like a retrieval and a lookup. That's completely false. That's the very reason why these models are useful, is because they allow you to sort of like interpolate.
We're distracted at the beginning of this, and
It sounds like what Arena is humanity's real-time exam.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good way.
That's a very well to
Sometimes I get asked, what's the last exam that AI should take, for humanity? And it seems like that's the wrong question to ask. We should be asking, what's the real-time exam you want your AIs to be taking before they get deployed every hour, every second of the day, especially as we start to get, I think one of the things that's emerging for me is that one of the Arena is misunderstood partly because we're just early in AI. And so while benchmarks like MMLU and the idea of these static exams were useful 3 years ago, the future is about real-time evaluation, real-time systems, real-time testing in the wild. Now, one thing that concerns a lot of people is the reliability of these systems when we start going from chatbots that are good at, let's say, compare a lot of people is the real-time systems, real-time testing in the wild. Now, one thing that concerns a lot of people is the reliability of these systems when we start going from chatbots that are good at, let's say, companionship and more consumer use cases to mission critical systems, defense, healthcare, financial services. How will Arena have to evolve as we go beyond companionship or web dev to those kinds of mission critical use cases?
I think that's one of the very reason we wanted to create a company to support this project to, further scale the platform. Right. So right now we are at 1 million monthly user now. What if we scale it to 5 to 10 or even more to capture even more diverse user base across different industries? And then in that case, we'll have the ability to really like zoom in into all these different kind of like areas that people really care about, that for critical mission task that it will be used to.
You can imagine when we are going to scale, we can have microsize for nuclear physicists, radiologists, and so forth, right? And these experts are going to come there to get the best answers to their, again, research questions.
So that's interesting. Is there a future where now that Arena is becoming a company, you could see a scientific lab or a shipping company or a defense company deploy their own Arena on their own infrastructure for their own users,
for
on
sure,
their own prompts?
Yeah,
essentially.
Many people have asked us for this already.
So these would be sort of private arenas.
Yeah,
private evaluation.
And it's worth saying, I think when people have these mission critical industries in mind, they often are thinking about the sort of like factual nature of the responses and so on and so forth. But in reality, even in such industries, the majority of questions that people ask are subjective. Okay, so the mythology that in hard sciences or in mission critical industries, people just have like cut and dried questions and they just need like a retrieval and a lookup, that's completely false. That's the very reason why these models are useful, is because they allow you to sort of like interpolate between these weird questions and answer questions that are not fully specified and give responses that are sort of like geared to answer the question, but might not have a fully factual basis, right? And they might incorporate factual elements through RAG, let's say, but there's a subjective nature to the response. And that's a reality that everyone's going to have to live with. If these systems are going to be deployed in medicine and defense and so on and so forth, they're going to be deployed in places where the data is messy, because that's where they're useful. Okay, given that fact, how are you going to make sure that they're reliable? Well, you need something like Arena.
At this point, Arena is hard to miss in the AI space. Whether it's Grok 3 coming out and Elon putting it up for the bulk of the keynote, or Demis using the Web Dev Arena scores to kind of demonstrate how good Gemini is. It's sort of become the standard bearer for evaluation and testing at all the big labs, right? But does that mean you guys have been helping them more than open source labs or smaller labs?
No, we work with model providers, small and large. Okay, so we work with basically anybody who wants to work with us. Within our constraints, try to be as helpful as possible. The fact is that part of the reason to build a company is because we don't want Wei Lin having to serve all of these requests from people manually himself. So it's been a challenge, but we try to scale as much as possible. And in fact, one of the things that we help everybody to do is pre-release testing of their models. Okay, so it's not just that we work together to evaluate the models are released, but we also try to be their release partners and say, hey, can we help you guys pick the models that do best on our user base, and use that as a guideline for which models they should actually release to the world. So that's the way our platform works, and that's getting us closer to something. As we've talked about, reliability is so important. These subjective measurements are so important.
Before I can really even go farther into this, we got to do some research on LM Arena, because I don't really know anything about it. It's a crowdsourced benchmarking project that major AI labs rely on test and market their AI models. Has raised 100 million. Okay. What's it do exactly? No noise. Okay. Let me just read it. Chatbot Arena started as an academic project at UC Berkeley. Now it's a startup called LM Arena, valued at 600 million, and co-led by Dreesen and Horowitz, founded in 2023. Okay. What is Chatbot Arena? What's language model based on? Okay. What does that mean exactly, though, the benchmark? Wow. How is it scored? Because that's crazy. So Google's number one. Okay. Wow, that's crazy. So there were more votes, whatever that means, for ChatGPT, but whatever this means, there was more of this. I don't know. I don't know what that means. But their total score. How are they scored, though? I guess it's just all together. But Google's 6th, 3rd, number 1. How are they tied? I don't know how this works. So Web Dev, Claude, Vision Gemini, Search Gemini. Wow. Copilot, DeepSeek, Text to Image Gemini. Wow. Wow, that's crazy. So Google's number one. Google's the number one rated AI right now. That's wild. Okay, interesting. So now we have a better idea of what they do. I guess.
How are we going to get to a world where there's a CI/CD pipeline where people can, test their models pre-release and make sure that they're doing well for all sorts of different diverse people? Well, you need something like Arena to do that, and that's part of what the company is geared to do. So what people do is they can test a bunch of different models. We do this with basically every provider that comes to us. And they can see, which one's doing better or worse on the distribution of Arena users. And then they can use that information to help them decide which model to release. After they decide to release a model, it gets continually evaluated forever. So that's where you get the freshness of the data, that the model, continues to be tested. And, we're pushing towards a world where these subjective and human considerations are part of model developers' final release pipeline.
So if I'm hearing you right, the more testing, the more reliable we should expect AI systems to get. So we should be
like with any software system.
This is one of the fundamental debates in the space, right? Is what is the measure of progress, the right measure of progress in the space? And there's a body of work that tries to create exams. They call them harder and harder exams. And for two reasons, I've always found LM Arena interesting. One is the opposite approach, which says, let the wisdom of the crowd guide us. And two, let open source actually define the examination, right? I think this is quite important, where if you get a group of experts in a room.
I had a moment of disappointment. I thought my chew was gone. See that? Empty. But then I remembered I'm always prepared. I just bought a new one. Bad habit, I know.
Who decide what the right exam is for humanity.
I'm quiet because my mother-in-law is sleeping downstairs with my children. Guess they're having a sleepover.
Inevitably, then if it turns out that group's values get encoded in that we have no way for the rest of the world to use AI systems on a different that are measured by a different set of values.
So it's great that people do these expert evals. It's totally fine. It's orthogonal from what we do. I'm glad we have them. But at the same time, you have to ask yourself, what makes somebody an expert? Right? What are they an expert on? I think the whole world is moving in a direction against experts being the be-all end-all of everything.
Right.
And, everybody actually has their own opinions and everybody has their own point of view. And in fact, there's so many natural experts in the world on all sorts of topics that they don't necessarily need a PhD in order to be really, really intelligent and high taste and have valuable opinions.
Right.
And I think that's one of the things I'm proud of with Arena is it allows us to actually go and say, hey, where are the natural experts? And actually, can we find data-driven ways to identify them? What if we can go look and say, hey, this person here in this random part of the world is actually incredible at coding and math.
Right.
Their vote actually means so much. And their preferences are able to guide the future of AI. That's an amazing thing. And we hope to be able to scale it further.
Okay, but I'm going to push back a little bit on this. I'm going to channel a few of the criticisms I've heard.
Yeah, please.
From experts, which is that, look, if you're an expert, you've been blessed with the brains, the resources, and so on to be a highly educated individual in your field. We have a responsibility to guide humanity. It's our job to actually guide the masses. We should be defining what good human preference is versus not, because the masses actually don't know what's good for them. The everyday users, the layperson. Yeah.
See, it's really good to hear the real big companies talk about the philosophical impact of what they're doing. Well, I guess the societal impact and coming at it from a philosophical point of view and then distilling it down into practicality. I think that's really good. We do a lot of that in the space. It's a lot of hype, a lot of fear, a lot of joy. A lot of mystery, suspense, doom and gloom.
Prefers slop, right? We have these arguments.
Yeah.
Is there a grain of truth, or how do you think about
So I think a few things here. So one, like Anastasio said, it's, this alternative to have hard exam, to create hard exam is valuable. No question about that. I think the other thing I want to point out, and I took that at heart, this kind of criticism and about kind of having expert labeling.
Right.
Now, I went to quite a few experts I know and I respect and ask them, would you label it? Would you label? Almost everyone told me, no, I don't have time, right? So there is a question there about, are you going to get really the experts, right? And I don't think so, right? You're getting some people from that area who are willing to do the labeling, but the best people are not willing. Fundamentally, they don't have time, right? No, but these people, if we offer to them, and we are not doing now, I'm talking about the future, a platform where their community come there and ask questions to push the boundaries, to help with their research and things like that. They are going to be, first of all, you are going to get these people, right? Because they do that in order to advance, again, in their research. And we are going to get also their votes. So fundamentally, I do think that we can get in arena, again, right now, I'm not talking about today, I'm talking about the future.
It even happens today.
It even happens
It
today.
even happens today.
So you get real experts, right? The top ones. Okay, the answer.
Unhirable people.
Unhirable people. That's a great way to say it. The other thing I want to say about the layman and so forth, Ange, you fund a lot of company. You are funding a lot of companies, the AI and A16Z, and you are on the board of many companies. What do they build? What do these companies build? What is their product? Who uses their product? Right? It's not the top experts. It's a layman, right? These are their users. That's how OpenAI makes money and so forth, many others, right? So then wouldn't the evaluation should take into account the preference of these users?
Dude, that's such a good point, because right now the big concern is the tech elites are going to be brainwashing or really programming their way of belief and thinking and viewing the world into these systems. And they think that it should be up to them on how they're guided. But what he's saying is that it is for the end user, after all. And so the end user, should be thought of in this, regardless of where they're at. I don't know. That's kind of where I'm going with it. Maybe I'm wrong.
Right? The answer is obviously yes, right? So how can something, again, like these exams are very important to understand the capabilities of these models, these benchmarks. Again, no question about that. But they are not going to reflect. MMLU is not probably as good as reflecting the preferences of the users of these AI products and services.
I want to just dig one level deeper here, which is that one of the things that we are really excited about is the question of why do people vote the way they do? Who's voting left, right? Why are they doing it? On what kind of prompts do they vote for one model or another? On what kind of topics are models better? Basically, can we decompose human preference into its constituent components? Let's say you have a criticism. You say people vote based on slop. Emojis are driving votes, and response length there's a huge response length bias, which is, it's true that people vote for longer responses, preferentially over shorter responses, even given the same content. It's a well-known human bias. This gets back into RL. Can we learn this bias and actually adjust for it and correct for it? And the answer is yes. That's why we're making style control default. So what we developed is this method called style control, which allows you to run not just, let's say, a Bradley-Terry regression, but also include certain covariates that model the effect of style and sentiment on how people vote. And what you get when you fit this model is not just a prediction of preference, but also an understanding of why people are voting the way they do. You know, we're trying to target a causal quantity, which is, you know, the causal effect of, let's say, response length or sentiment and so on and so forth. Okay, you know, there's always more work to do to get things closer to the actual causal estimate that we want. But if we continue to decompose human preference into its constituent components, what we're building is an ever richer evaluation that can tell us all the factors that go into response, how you can optimize people's preferences, you know, keeping style fixed. Let's say I want to remain concise, but I want to maximize your preferences. Okay, how am I supposed to do that? Well, you know, not a lot of people have that information, but we're building the methodology that allows you to do that. Okay, and the question is, can we disentangle style versus substance?
Yeah,
that's it. There is an effect, and you want to know about it. Period. The platform helps you.
And what is the impact?
And I like the way that he kind of broke that down and showed how, okay, there's this dichotomy and here's how we manage that dichotomy. That was really good. The tension between, you know, the elites controlling it and then the masses having a say in voting, and then working together. How do you balance that out? Very interesting.
And what is the impact?
Yeah, this is another, I think, important area to dig into. There was a moment where you guys decided that it was insufficient to keep measuring the progress of the models on coding with the base design of the platform, which is just Chatbot Arena. And I remember seeing a launch which was Web Dev, I think you call it Web Dev Arena, and showing up to a completely different interface. And then realizing that this was a pretty big change for you guys, right? Why did we need a new kind of arena to correct for that effect? Why was that necessary?
I think that comes back to, I think, Yang's point a little bit, like when you build a product, an AI product, you want to know about how people use it. You want to understand why users prefer this over that. And in order to collect that kind of data, you have to build sort of like a product first, right? And then, as we know, over the past 2 years, people have been building very different kinds of applications on top of AI, beyond just chatbot.
Right.
So chatbot is one of the widely used interface right now for human to interface with AI. But these days, people are applying these models to, you know, coding, and then more like tool use, agentic behavior, that kind of stuff, right? So that's the first step. We were thinking like, okay, how can we capture all these use cases?
Right.
And then the answer to that is we have to build something that people can use, again, the same,
Right.
an environment that people can test in real time to give us real world feedback. So that was the original like idea. That was kind of like last summer, just at the beginning of this kind of text to web, text to app trend. At the beginning was cloud artifacts.
Mm-hmm.
That was the first.
Right.
And we saw that we were amazed by that. And then how can we build eval for that, right?
And we have to give credit to Aryan on the team.
Yeah, and then Aryan basically was like just joined the team, and then he was interning actually at Vercel. So we were saying, okay, why don't we build something new? And at the time, Cloud Artifact, how can we build evaluation for that kind of applications, text to web? And then that was the idea.
One small parenthesis. So far, we talked, the three of us, but eventually the team grew quite a bit. And right now, I don't know, it's like almost like 20 people, and both, you know, graduate and especially undergraduate students, and doing a lot of very exciting and interesting work to expand the abilities and capabilities and the reach of Chatbot Arena.
Right.
So I just want to make sure that other colleagues of mine are involved here, and like Joey and others. And I think the credit goes much more beyond the three of us. But that's what we want to provide. You want to, you know, whatever you want. we hope that you'll find the answer to.
Fundamentally, if you're looking at the leaderboard, there's only one thing really that matters, which is, do you care about the preferences of the community of people that come to vote on our platform? That's it. That's what we measure. It's the only thing that we claim to measure. We don't claim to be an AGI benchmark. We are faithfully representing the preferences of our community. So that's why it's so important to us that we continue to grow our community and we get a diverse community of all different people, experts, non-experts, artists, scientists,
Different languages.
different languages, everybody under the sun. We want coming to this platform to express their preferences. Because if we can get that to happen, it already happens to some extent, but if we can continue to grow it, what's going to happen is, again, in order for a model to do well, what needs to happen is new people need to come in and vote for it. And so if we can provide this lens into the preferences of the world.
Things are moving, right? It's like these are changing. This is, again, it's not like, it's like we have the study, and you want to talk about the freshness, right? About we all see fresh prompts, right? It's not like, oh, we are going to see all these prompts over and over again, like kind of saturated. That's not the case.
That was the very beginning of why we believe Arena is fundamentally different.
Related with contamination.
The very beginning of Arena is to try to solve the contamination problem, the overfeeding problem, which is like people test models on a static benchmark.
Or what people call overfeeding.
Yeah, what people call overfeeding. So how do you overcome overfeeding? You collect new data, right? That's how you overcome overfeeding. And an Arena is designed to collect new data every second. So all the questions are new, like all the votes are new. And then we measure basically what's the difference between all these prompts, right? What's the distribution look like and so on. And then we conservatively estimate over 80%, something like that product.
Yeah.
Different.
Correct. And this study was done by another member of our team, Lisa, and basically measures out how many more fresh prompts you have in one day compared to what you've seen in the past 3 months, right? And by a similarity score of something like 75%, you have over 70 of these prompts are fresh.
75, 80%.
Or over 80%, right? So it's a large number of prompts are fresh, right? And when we say fresh, we are talking a similarity. The test is not very high. That it's not like, oh, they're identical. Right. No.
Yeah, just to dig in one click deeper into what Wei-Lin said, what is overfitting? Static benchmarks overfit. Why? It's because, as Jan...
That's interesting, that there's new prompts. There's still a lot of data needing to be collected in order for the benchmarking to be even better.
Jan said earlier, you're getting this.
So it's early. It's early.
Doing the same test over and over. You have a model, you test it, you look at whether or not it's improved on a static data set, then you find another model, you test it, and you pick the one that does better and better and better. And what ends up happening is that the test becomes meaningless because you've seen it so many times that you've memorized the answers. That's what overfitting is. Chatbot Arena is immune from overfitting by design. Because you're always getting fresh questions. In order to do well on the Arena, new users need to come and vote for your model. That's it. That means that users like it.
One thing I've noticed is that the same researchers who often argue with me that Arena is a terrible evaluation system, the leaderboard is not to be trusted, the scores are rigged, they're gameable, have tended to also celebrate when they're on top of the leaderboard. And the second is I find actually increasingly, especially for specialist arenas like web dev, there's a natural tendency to just accept that this is a really good indicator of the underlying capabilities. Why is that? Why is web dev arena such a good proxy for actual performance improvements when it comes to a capability like coding, which is quite general purpose, but it's very counterintuitive. Programming is actually a very general purpose discipline and skill, and yet it seems like the capabilities in a very general way are still being able to are captured well on a specialist arena like web dev arena. Why is that?
Yeah, first let me just say, I think that all of these arenas have signal in them. It's not just web dev arena. It's just people have more opinions on language. So web dev is a little bit more objective. It's easier to say the website you build it, and it's, this one's better than the other. There's a lot of signal in it. Also, it shatters the models. And what I mean by that is it can be very clear that one model is way better than another on web dev arena immediately. Bam, you see it, and it's like...
Why is that?
Just the capabilities of the models. Maybe Wei-Lin can say more.
I think it's just much, much harder task because it's like from text, a description of a website. And you have to, first understand the request and then build, write code, right? And then the code has to satisfy certain requirement, that's a style requirement or component, that kind of stuff. and then it has to compile, right? It has to be, we basically run it live in browser and then would connect to the sandbox, that kind of stuff. So there are a lot of like parts the model has to get right in order to build a website that people can, really interact with.
So fundamentally discriminates much better across the models because it's a much harder problem. So very few get it right.
So it's in reality, for critics who say, these static exams are hard tests and Arena is an easy to game benchmark. In fact, WebDev Arena is a great example that shows it's a really hard evaluation. It's a hard test, actually. It just proxies the real world better than some static multiple choice question test. Is that roughly right?
Yeah, for sure. And then a lot of every input from user is for a real world task. They are trying to build some website real. And then that also measures something that's like beyond just, academic benchmark that's we imagine what user would do, right? This is like really trying to approximate the user intent, user preferences directly.
So I kind of want to go over this again now that I have an understanding of what they're doing. So if we go over here to this page, which is back on LM Arena's website, you can see the leaderboard. So it's broken down in different categories, and it was just done 7 days ago. So as of 7 days ago, text, Gemini was voted #1. For web dev, it was Claude Opus 4 was voted #1, Gemini #2. And you'll see something very interesting here. Vision, Gemini's #1. Search, Gemini's #1. Copilot, DeepSeek. Text to image, Gemini. Overall, Gemini. So more people vote in favor of the functions of Gemini than they do almost anything else, with the exception of Claude and DeepSeek. They're the only two other large language models that test higher in different categories than Gemini. OpenAI isn't even there in web dev. Like, it's ranked 6th. Gemini's ranked #2. Like, they have this 1-1, but if you look at the scores, there's obviously differences in the scores. But anyway, like it says, like it's tied almost, but even then it's like it scored overall better, right? But then you go to Vision, ChatGPT is #3. You go to search, it is 7, and Gemini's #1, and there's a bunch of these other ones right here. Text, #2, 3, 4, but Gemini's then right there and right there. So is Grok. It's kind of crazy to see, actually. I thought that OpenAI was like cream of the crop, but Google is, obviously.
I have to say, I also just completely disagree with the foundation of the question. The implicit assumption is that chat is easy, or that it's even easier than web dev. That's completely false. It's a completely naive perspective that people have on this, because it's hard to build something that people love. People are good at chat, but you like some people way better than others. It's subjective, and everybody has their own opinions, and the landscape is very, very rich. You might like a very different model than me. Somebody else, let's say a musician, might like a different model, a much different model than I do. And understanding all of those differences is really hard. And anybody who thinks that is gameable is deluding themselves.
That's the strongest form argument then.
That goes to Rick Rubin's point with the video we watched yesterday, the way of coding, or the way of vibe coding, whatever. How he said that the creativity is really what's going to bring it out. And that's kind of what he's talking about there too, which we keep seeing this, that creativity is a central part in all of this.
Isn't the right way to allow me to evaluate whether the model is good or not to allow me to generate my own leaderboard?
You as a person? Absolutely. Yeah, and we should be giving you the tools to do that, and we're currently building them.
And so this is quite profound. You see the world going where everybody has their own personal arena?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
It should be personalized just for you. You should understand which models are best for you.
And it's going to be for your task.
That's very interesting. Personalized arenas. That's really cool. I mean, we'll see if it happens, right?
Person and task, right? Because if you want to do different things, you may have a different leaderboard, right? If you have a question about tax today, you go to different people than if you have a question about programming or whatever, right? So that's kind of also is going to depend on what task you want to accomplish, right? And I really want to go back to one thing. I think that because I try to think quite a bit about all the criticisms, because on the face of it, intuitively for some people makes sense, right? That's why many people make the same criticism. And I think there is another thing going on. We as humans, we believe that, why do people say Arena is not good? Because people are fooled, right? That's fundamentally their kind of argument. They're fooled because long answers, more emoji and things like that. And when I look from that perspective as a human, in my mind is that I am not going to be fooled, right? That's what, it's not relevant. These guys are going to be fooled by these things. No, I'm not. That's why it's not good. That's why it's not a good proxy. The problem is that I am fooled, right? Everyone is fooled. And this is actually, that's why the chatbot Arena, it's like Anastasios said, it's a proxy. It provides a magnifying glass. But, all of us, we have our own peculiarities, our own, culture, our own, history built on interaction with different people, right? So we have different preferences. That's fundamentally what it is, right? And these preferences are not fully objective, right? Because people say it's only one objective answers, but all of us are different, right? That's kind of the fundamental disconnect between the criticism and actually what we provide and actually what everyone we believe needs, right?
So if they're going to become more personalized, then that would mean they would have to even be able to break down the categorization more. So that way you can really customize it to a person. That's kind of interesting to think about. Like, that's where like the tutors will come in, being able to connect them. That's like agent to agent, MCP. We learned yesterday from Andrew Neig that that's like very early. So I wonder if those two components will help create the personalized arenas. And then showing why people like certain ones over another. Getting that information as well. What kind of prompting do they do? What kind of prompting style do they have? What's most common in different platforms? That's very interesting.
To double click on that a little bit, you said we all have our own culture, right? And Ben Horowitz, we all know well, has a quote I love, which is, he says, culture is not a set of beliefs, it's a set of actions, right? So let's say our belief, the philosophy that Arena has is that the set of actions a user takes when using an AI model is the best source of truth for whether that model is good or not for them, versus some third-party closed source evaluation.
Telling you what is good, telling you what is good for you.
Right.
And that's why, again, it's like going back to the previous that, I think what you hear is that capturing the human preference is fundamental, because we are building these AIs to interact with humans, right? I think that's kind of the foundation. But if you, like we have in the previous discussion, people say, well, yeah, but these other people are fooled. Right. This is not me, right? Although I am fooled as well, but I don't believe, right? You always believe about yourself that you are better than you are. But then we can provide like style control. Okay, so force, you can remove that, adjust for that effect, right? And we are going to provide more and more. You can adjust for that effect and that effect and that effect, right? So you get your answers as well.
LM Arena started as a research project. So take us back to how it began.
So it was started around 2 years ago in late April 2023. And then at that time, before Arena, we were working on a project called Vicuna, which is like one of the first open models that's been released, like the ChatGPT kind of clone. Yeah. And then at that time, Llama 1 was just released, which is a base model. It doesn't really know how to chat with human, only gone through like pre-training process. At that time, I don't think people call this post-training yet. People call it instruction fine-tune, that kind of stuff. So we were like in the lab exploring how do we reproduce this, right? How do we make an open source version of ChatGPT? And then, credits to Lianmin. He was having kind of like idea that we could use some of the open data published on the internet. That's kind of like user ChatGPT conversation. It was called Shared GPT. And it was like kind of like a high quality set of dialogues that users share. So basically we come as a group, a bunch of PhD students in the lab, set an ambition goal, which is like we try to release this model, train this model in 2 weeks, that kind of stuff. So then during that process, the result was surprisingly. At that time, we were like playing with the model, and then we thought like we gotta demo this to the world. So we basically just set up a website, and then put that model on the website, and then release it. At that time, it was like there's like a huge debate, like internally, like how should we, when we release it, how should we evaluate this model? How good is this model really? It vibe well, right? Because when we compare it to Llama, the base one, you can feel the difference, right? The model just learn how to chat, learn how to speak like a ChatGPT. So there was a huge debate, like how do we evaluate this? At that time, we didn't have much time. So we were like, okay, we either do this kind of like labeling, come up with questions ourselves and label the data and then compare it with other models, or we do something automatic. And then at that time, there was like GPT-4 just came out in March. People were like wondering, what can it do, right? And then we were like, okay, why don't we just use it for evaluation? As we use GPT-4 as a judge to do this automatic evals. At that time, no one believed it. And then it was like, again, huge debate, but we didn't have time. So we just, ended up doing it. And it worked surprisingly well again, and we released it. But the huge problem after that is like, still, there's an open problem, which is like, how do we evaluate these chatbots, right? So soon after, we kind of like come up with the idea that why don't we let everyone in the community vote which model is better? Because at the time we serve that model, and then we also serve some of the other open source model at a time. At a time, every week there's a new fine tune. So we register a website, we demo them, all of them, and then we come up with like kind of like a side-by-side UI that people can compare them. And then soon after, we say, okay, why don't we come up with a battle mode, which is like we anonymize their identity, and that people vote. So that was the origin of Arena, which is basically trying to solve our problem, which is how do we evaluate these models, understand these models' difference.
Something I just thought about is that what if local LLMs are how we get these personalized arenas? Because effectively, you're kind of making your own LLM for your own data. So if you have your own server and you're hosting it locally, that would be the personalization arena, wouldn't it? I don't know.
Actually, the first time we did try to have some students, buy some pizza, get them in a room, and label the replies from Vicuña and other model to compare them. And then, obviously, that didn't scale. And then it was this LLM as a judge. We tried, and it worked surprisingly well. And then it was quite a bit of debate. Okay, we are going to build a platform to scale, because the question is still, okay, it seems that anecdotally, GPT-4, it was really just 2 weeks before we started to use it as a judge. It's still the question, okay, yeah, it seems that it's doing well, but still, it's like, how does it compare with humans, right? And that was a question about, okay, how do we scale as a human evaluation? And we discussed quite a bit about how to do it, because it was not clear. Because if you think about before, you just ask people, I have a prompt, and the prompt is answered by all models, and then you label it, right? Good and bad. That's kind of the typical way that how would you scale up that process? Then you need kind of to rank them, right? And you have n choices, answers of the same prompt from n models. It's very hard to rank them, right? It's like, think about, right? To get slightly different in tone and so forth, try to rank them. And then we saw quite a bit. I think the inspiration about was how humans in real life rate, say, players or teams in games, right? And obviously you have the tournament. That's one way to do it, where you have, so to speak, the players plays with each other head-to-head. And then based on that, you are going to have some number of points to win or lose or tie. And then you are going to have a leaderboard, right? But that again, the problem is that if you have a tournament, typically the assumption in a tournament is that the number of players do not change across during the tournament, right? And also in general, most of the tournament, each player has to play with everyone, so it's kind of an n-squared problem, or n is the number of players. And then we thought about, okay, there are other ways in real life how player or teams are ranked when they don't play with each other. They don't have a chance, either because the number of players is too large, or you need to also accommodate new players entering the game. And that's why we were about, then we thought about, okay, there are disciplines where this is done, like chess, that tennis, ATP rating, and many others. And that was the idea. And we started, okay, why don't you do something like ELO score? Okay, and for that, what do you need? Oh, you need only, head-to-head. And, not everyone needs to play in the same tournament. And that's why we adopted. And that's why Arena has this battle mode in which you have a prompt and answer from 2 randomized, anonymized large language models. And you can pick which one is better, where there is tied, and so forth.
And when was the moment when you joined the conversation and brought from what I understand, the Bradley Terry approach.
Yeah, it turned out it was like deeper technically than we thought. So at that time, Jan was like, we need to find someone to back this up, or like on the theory side, to have a solid foundation to rank all these models. It's not, at that time, it was no longer like really like a fun project anymore. It was started as like a fun project.
And people started to pay attention to it, right?
Yeah.
So you better do something. And I went to Michael Jordan, my colleague, very famous machine learning AI researcher and faculty here. And I've been working with him actually when we built this kind of labs at Berkeley, cross-disciplinary labs. We were working with him in like 2005, 2006. He was joining the system people, database people to work together and exciting projects. And he told me, oh, I know exactly. I have the guy for you. It's Anastasio.
I saw what was being built. At the time, Arena was not still close to what it is today. It was, I think, not that much usage. I saw it and I thought, wow, what a great opportunity to do some interesting statistical modeling and theory. Like being able to understand, how do we optimally sample models? How do we perform this estimation? Okay, let's move from ELO to Bradley Terry because we're actually performing an estimate here instead of just like, and the ELO score moves over time. It doesn't converge, but Bradley Terry models converge. And how do we then construct confidence intervals properly for this estimate and so on and so forth? All that stuff was super interesting to me.
We were meeting like just next to
two doors down. And we wrote on the whiteboard like 5 or 6 different, topics.
Yeah.
I mean, we started working on them and the rest is history, right?
In many ways, I feel like this is the birth of Arena couldn't have happened anywhere else other than an interdisciplinary lab at a fundamental research university like Berkeley. Is that true, or do you think?
Well, it certainly would have been worse if it came out of somewhere else. And the reason is because the fact that we come from Berkeley and from a university really speaks to our scientific approach and neutrality. I think if it came from an industrial lab, people would always have questions about, oh, well, these people are they also training a model and what's their incentive and so on and so forth. But the reality is we were just students. We were doing this in order to evaluate models, and it came from a scientific perspective. That's it. And I think that's something that people can see when they look at us and builds a lot of trust in our business.
The other angle here is that in a lab like this,
good point.
What you can get, maybe in the industry, you can also get maybe interdisciplinary teams, but they are going to be large teams, right? Because you go, okay, you are going to do, the team which is doing AI, the team which is doing systems, work together. So these are already large teams. But here, what you get a small teams, a few people, which everyone can come from different areas, right? We have people who are kind of systems. Early on, we have to build the systems to serve these open source models, right? We have to serve this vicuña, like Oirin mentioned, right? Then you have to have people who are pretty good. Actually, when we use this shared GPT data, we are doing quite a bit of data preprocessing in order to, to pick some data curation and so forth, right? Then when Anastasio joined, we have now machine learning experts, right? But the team still is like 4 or 5 people. And as you know, early on, small teams move very fast. So I think that's kind of the difference, that you have a very small team, but interdisciplinary and small. So I think that you may get in industry, you may get in interdisciplinary teams, but they're going to be large.
If you could just teleport back in time to that moment in early 2023, correct me if I'm wrong, but if I had to kind of summarize the research environment in the Bay Area at the time, so most people basically were extolling the death of AI in academia, right? The idea that, you can't really do any serious research, you can't contribute to the frontier of computer science or in AI from a research institute. It was quite common, actually, if you remember that.
And it's nothing more satisfying than proving these people wrong.
Right. So what do you think people got wrong?
I think that if I may take a step back here, because I'm old enough, so I've seen a few of those. I remember when I was a student, I was doing system work and networking.
Right.
That was the internet days. And I was going to these conferences, and there were panels. Are the operating systems dead? Research in the operating system, is that dead? That was the topic of the panel. And the reason for that was, at that time, it was at the end of the previous century. It was Microsoft was dominating, and then Apple. And then, of course, there were some FreeBSD and so forth. But then, although it didn't come from academia, it was Linux. Right? Actually, Linux was preceded by Minix, which came from academia, from Netherlands. So that's one. Then in 2004, like when we came here and we started this lab, there was a question also that was, is this kind of distributed system? Because a lot of researchers on distributed system. What can academia do? Right? Because it was Google was doing all the research of Q systems, MapReduce, Google File systems, all of that happening at Google. Right? Best people going at Google and so forth. And then we done here, then it comes Spark, right? Which also come from academia, right? And I think that's when this started. It was actually the question people were surprised about Vicuña, just a bunch of students, and actually their own initiatives, right? I knew almost after the fact that this happened. Pick this kind of data set from the internet, which was high quality, and use it. And people were so surprised about the quality, right? That was what people asking, is this real, right? So I want an evaluation. I'm not kind of, you just show me some stuff anecdotal, right? And okay, it's looking good, but how about, is that?
So some people didn't believe it, and then say, this is a GPT-4 wrapper.
I remember
When we
that.
serve it.
I remember we were at NeurIPS later that year, right? And I remember Wei Lin was sitting at a table next to me, and a really well-known famous researcher who's still at OpenAI, asked me, "Oh, is that the team that worked on that Vicuña bot?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Oh yeah, I've been wanting to have a conversation with them because we think they're violating our terms of service because they're just reselling our GPT-4." And I don't know if he came and confronted you, but that was very much the default assumption people had. Right? It was a disbelief.
So because for a while, it was the best open source models. I don't know, 3 months, 4 months, or whatever. So that's why the evaluation was so important back then, right? Because it's kind of this disbelief. So we try to support with some evaluation, which seems more objective. That indeed it's a good model. Again, since then there are many other things we've done here and open source like inference, LLM inference like VLLM and HLang. But I do think that what happens in this sense in industry. I was actually on a panel yesterday. It was the same this kind of discussion. Okay, it's like what can maybe academia should do this thing, and the industry should do this thing, right? Like let's. As the industry just can do anything like training and so forth. I think at the end of the day, it is about what resources you have and what problems you solve. And over again, I think through the example I gave, if academia has the resources, it's going to surprise you. Clearly, it's going to be at the very edge of innovation and creativity, and so that's always almost happened. Right, like in this case. In this case, of course, we didn't need huge resources, right? It's just a group of smart, passionate students. So when Chatbot Arena started, it was a lot of excitement and so forth. But then it was this thing. Okay, it was a feeling, at least for some people in the group, that we are done here. We publish the paper and so forth, right? For a while, even if you look at the usage, it's kind of dropping a little bit, and it's almost
done.
Almost done. And then Wei Lin, at that time, his main thrust of research was different. Some, graph neural networks, distributed graph neural networks, and things like that. And I remember at some point in one of our one-on-one meetings, Wei Lin came to me and said, "Look, Jon, I really like, and I want to, instead of doing this kind of work, I really am passionate about Chatbot Arena. I want really to do it, right, and to focus on it." And then when then it started, and Wei Lin is like one-man backend, right? Starting
and then marketing
and marketing. And he started to add more models to the leaderboard, market it, and so forth. And very soon after that, Anastasio came, and then it was kind of magical, right? You have these people who are so passionate, and they're working so well together. They are so complementary in skills and even personalities. Then it started to shoot up. Right, and I'm mentioning that because without that kind of inflection point, which came, long after it started as a project, we wouldn't be here.
I think there's a chart I saw recently that showed that compared the number of models being released and tested on LM Arena per year over the last 2 years. And if you look at Q1 of 2023. It was, I think, 2 models.
It's exactly.
And if you look at just this past quarter, I think there were 68 models, something like that, right? In total, that first year, there were about 12 models or so. And today it's over 280 or something on the platform. So at some point, it sounds like it took the two of you realizing that this deserved to be more than a one-off paper. When was that?
I still remember when we worked on the paper for Chatbot Arena. It was like, a couple weeks of really hard work, and we were like pushing all the way until the deadline. And afterwards, I turned to my girlfriend at the time. I was like, you know what? I think this is going to be a pretty good paper.
You're still in the paper stage.
Yeah. And, Yeah, Leland and I were talking at the time, but I think we started very early thinking about this, what this could become, and trying to de-risk it in various ways, and trying to build it and seeing, hey, is this growing? Can we keep building on it?
Another field that really like drive the growth is competition. The competition of AI just become much more intense in early 2024 when Claude 3 came up.
So let me tell you to answer your question, because I think that it's a very interesting and maybe I have a more kind of unique view. As you know, I started other companies which are based on projects coming from this lab, like Databricks with Spark and or Anyscale with Ray. And there, the motion was pretty clear. You have a successful open source project, which gets more and more popular. And then there are some companies which start to use the project. And then you get to the point that, okay, if I'm going to bet on this project to be part of my infrastructure, what happens when the students who build it, like Mateo and so forth, graduate? Right? Who is going to maintain it? Who is going to evolve it? So in that particular case, it's kind of natural. Okay, if really this gets to get even more successful, you have to have a company backing it, whether it's a new company or an existing company. And if there is no existing company, it's people who are on that project, if they want to push it further, almost like you have to start a company to have enough resources to push it. But this was different for the reasons Anastasio said. It's kind of, we are Berkeley, it's kind of a trust with neutral. And Waylin, I remember, mentioned to me like 1 year ago, he's like, I think maybe we should do a company. And I told him, man, what you're talking about? This has to be remain neutral. Maybe we do a kind of foundation and so forth. And this discussion actually went back and forth for a while. I was even frustrated. I'm telling this guy, but I think it should happen. And, it should be just kind of foundation and so forth. And he comes to me, it's like not hearing. He's like telling me the same thing, right?
So we were trying to convince you, basically.
They were trying to convince me, right? And then when for me, it's like it was, we talked with some of this foundation and so forth. But when it was very clear for me is that when you started to get more and more demand and so forth, and there is no way you need so much funding to build such a platform, right? Because you need to serve the models and you need to build an entire backend, scalable backend and things like that to do it. And then UI UX, right? So when you look at that sheer amount of work, in order to push them to the next level, there is no way you can do it without having significant funding. So that kind of, for me, was a kind of inflection point. But these guys can say more because they were convinced about this long before I was.
Yeah, another thing I think we were discussing last year was when we were trying to discuss whether this can be really like a business that solves more fundamental problems in this space. I think Anastasia at that time was giving some perspective on ever more granular evaluation that we can provide with the data. Right? So you want to say more about that?
Chatbot Arena, when you look at the leaderboard, runs like a marginal regression, which means that the leaderboard sort of ranks models on average across all users and all the prompts that they ask. But, there's a vision where you take this to the logical extreme where, there's the overall leaderboard, then you can categorize the leaderboard. The real value is in, well, what if I can tell you which model is best for you? What if I can tell you which model is best for you and your question for your business? There's so many interesting methodological questions to ask there. And actually, they require a lot of resources to answer. So, one thing that we've been working on recently is called Prompt to Leaderboard. Prompt to Leaderboard asks the following question. You give me your prompt. Can we tell you which models are best for that prompt specifically? Now, the problem is we've never seen that prompt before. We've only seen any prompt once or 0 times, right? Because most people don't ask, every question under the sun. Fundamentally, it's a hard question because the thing that you're trying to estimate is, what if infinitely many people came to me and asked the same question and then voted? Right. That's the thought experiment you're trying to run in your head, but you can't really answer that question by running a standard regression. So instead, what we came up with was a strategy for training language models that can output leaderboards. Right. And it's actually a deep question because what essentially you're doing is you're training LLMs to output these Bradley-Terry regressions that we were talking about earlier. And how do you do that? Well, you have to make sure that as you train the model, the regression sort of naturally emerges from the data. And the only thing you're getting is binary preference. But nonetheless, it turns out that you can do it. This has so much utility, and it requires so many resources in order to really scale up. It converts the problem of testing and evaluations, which is normally kind of like an unsexy problem. You think about it as okay, how am I going to evaluate ML? Well, I'll just calculate the accuracy. right? But the reality is that that really doesn't reflect the heterogeneity of the performance of the model for different settings and for different people. But instead, what Parental Leaderboard teaches us is that you can convert the problem of evaluation into the problem of learning. What if I learn something that can tell me how my models are performing in all different parts of the space? It turns out that you can do that by training big language models, and that because language models are sort of the intermediary that gets you to this evaluation, there's also a scaling law that comes along with it, which is to say that the more data you get, the bigger you build the platform, the better you can make your evaluations, the more granular you can make them, the more personalized you can make them. Very, very powerful idea. And I think that's part of the reason why we were convinced, hey, this deserves to be a company of its own. So fundamental technical innovation that's going to change the way people.
Yeah, this is actually incredible. And I'm doing a deep dive on my own as I'm listening to this. I'm doing two things at once. And I'll share my thoughts in a little bit.
Approach the space.
And let me try to follow that with a less accurate explanation, but I think it drives home the point why the data is so important. So with the Parental Leaderboard, it's basically when you give your prompt, and again, like Anastasio said, we may have never seen that prompt, more likely. However, what we have seen maybe a lot of other prompts, which are similar with your prompts, right? So intuitively, you can think that you can use the votes to these similar prompts as a proxy to compute how good are the models for your prompt. Now, from this kind of, maybe not as accurate analogy or explanation, you can see that if the more data I have, the more prompts similar to your prompt I have. So the more accurate I can be. There is another thing we didn't touch on, and what actually for me I was so excited about the project early on. And if you think about outside Vicuna and our own story, how people and still evaluate these models, you have this kind of benchmarks. Right. MMLU, Helm at that point, Sweep Bench, all of this model, right? The problem with that is that they are static, right? So you can sometimes overfit them. And at that time, if you remember, there are already starting to be discussions, I'm talking about 1.5 years ago, 2 years ago, about contamination, right? There are some very high-profile examples. And why? Because these large language models are going to train, as we know now, the data is it's a bottleneck. So they train on all the possible data they are going to get their hands on, right, in the internet, right? And many of these benchmarks are also out there. So it's not intentionally, probably many, but they are going to train on some of them on the very benchmarks they are going to be evaluated on. So this is kind of another fundamental problem. And I think that the unique thing about Chatbot Arena is kind of evolves over time. We are thinking that, we are thinking that the way people typically evaluate these models is like giving a student over and over again the same exam, right? Certainly we don't do that, or at least we try not to do that, right? I'm talking as a faculty now, right? For each class, for each year, we need to give different exams, right? So that's kind of, again, with the humans, the same thing, right? To evaluate humans, to evaluate, which kind of learn over time, like these models, you need to come with something, you need to evolve the benchmarks, right? The exam, right? So I think that's kind of unique part and unique value of Chatbot Arena. And probably these guys can say more about the kind of freshness and the evolution of the benchmark over time.
What are the biggest differences between benchmarking and evaluation?
So let me just zoom out for a second. Benchmarks, how are they collected? What happens is that you ask a question or you give an input, and then a human grades the output. Right. And then what is the benchmark supposed to be? There's an answer key. A benchmark is like a test with an answer key. A human has to look at it and tell you what's right or wrong. Right. The fundamental insight of the Arena is that by virtue of the fact that we built this platform, we can do something closer to reinforcement learning. Benchmarks are like supervised learning. Arena is like reinforcement learning. In supervised learning, you can only do as well as the best human that you have. Because what's happening is that you're learning. In reinforcement learning, you're learning from the world. You're able to learn things better than the best human could ever teach you. Why? Because you're only getting these preferences. You're getting, was this good? Was this bad? Nobody needs to tell you why. Nobody needs to tell you, hey, you need to improve the facts. Your writing style needs to improve in XYZ way, and you should edit the sentence. Forget all of that. For the same reason why reinforcement learning has been so powerful in training language models, it is also powerful in evaluation. It can capture things that you and I, if we were looking, could never understand how to encode. Right. It is the open world nature allows you to go back and mine the data in order to extract insights that are much more profound than we could come up with ourselves.
So this is really a fundamental tension, right? If let's say you are a a leader in the AI industry, your product lab or your product company, and you say, we believe the most valuable thing for us to do is build useful AI products. We're not interested in, benchmark hacking. We're interested in making truly useful products. If that is actually true, you should be strictly supportive of testing your systems more and more on arenas like Web Dev Arena. Let's say you want to build a useful web development AI experience. Then you should want your teams to be testing more and more on this product, right?
You want to do well on the distribution of natural use.
Let's say then we expect anybody who's serious about building useful AI to want to use testing environments like Web Dev Arena more. Why are people complaining that some labs are testing more than others? And why are they saying that's a bad thing?
So I think it's worth saying that we offer the same level of service to all labs. Okay, there's nobody that we treat preferentially or anything. It's a neutral platform. We want to help the ecosystem advance. But second of all, addressing your question more directly, people do not yet fully understand the arena. I think people still think about the arena as a benchmark. People still think about it as something like, oh, people can overfit on this thing. But what hasn't sort of permeated, and it's because it's just such a new way to approach evaluation, is when you have fresh data, you can't overfit. It just means you're doing well, period. There's no overfitting that can occur. What can happen is you can do well. And you can argue with me about whether doing well is a good thing. Okay, that's perfectly fine. That's not where people's heads are at. I think people's heads are still at, oh, you tested so much and that must mean that because people are used to it. Because people, oh, it's stat 101, so on and so forth. I know statistics. If you're doing well on this distribution, that's a strictly good thing, all else equal. Right? And then people can choose, how much do I want to tune my model for chat? That's your choice. You can choose how much you care about this signal. And that's okay too. So I think it's a fundamental misunderstanding, but I think as we continue building this, as it grows, people will become more educated on this topic. And then I expect that the world will understand it.
And again, just to make sure, because we had the discussion with Anastasia early on. So overfitting refers to the same data.
Right.
Okay. But when you do, like you do supervised learning or something like that, then what you have data, trained data, and then you have test data, which you don't show during the training. And you hope that it's going to do well on the trained data, right? So overfitting means it's doing well on the test data, but only on the trained data.
Right.
If you think from that perspective, cannot be overfitting because we have continuously fresh data, right? The one thing can people say that it's a particular domain which is given by the set of users and so forth, and you are going to learn to do better with this domain, in this domain, which is perfectly fine. Probably you should care about that because the domain is a group of people you care about, right? But it's very different. Overfitting, it's very particular meaning.
Right.
And what people think about here, I'm going to do, when they use the term overfitting, I'm going to learn how to do well on arena audience, right? That's what they have in mind, right? But that's fundamentally different.
Well, actually, so let's talk about a second for the arena audience, because you mentioned that's a critical part, right? As opposed to continuing to train your model to perform well on a static distribution. One of the things that shocked me between the first time, Waylon and I chatted the beginning of last year to the end of last year was that arena traffic had grown by 10x. The user base of the community had gone up by 10 times. Why is that? That feels like something people don't, it certainly wasn't visible to me. What's going on under the hood? Why are more and more people using Arena? And in your mind, is that one of the reasons why people don't realize how hard it is to actually overfit? Why overfitting is almost not possible?
Millions of people's preference. And I think one of the reasons why people are kind of like surprised to see usage grow is because when they think about Arena, they think about the leaderboard.
Right.
They think about, again, a benchmark. How would 1 million people use a benchmark? That's strange. But in reality, Arena is basically real-world testing. And not just real-world testing, the best AI from all the frontier labs.
Right.
Does the demand grow over time for people to test the best AI, use the best AI? Yes, right? So that's the very foundation of Arena, which is this is like the open space where everyone can come here to compare all the AIs for their own use cases for free. And this demand we've been seeing has been growing, and we believe it has a very strong potential to continue to grow. And in the same time, we collect all sorts of comparison data that we can use for evaluation for all sorts of tasks.
So one thing I want to point out, because we have been talking through this discussion a lot about votes, right? The vote is a fundamental construct which allow us to evaluate this model and so forth. The votes have high quality. If they don't have high quality, it's like you said, garbage in, garbage out. And we do believe, and there are at least two things we believe that the votes on Arena are high quality. One is that the people who ask questions are the people who evaluate the answers. So presumably they are going to have the context for that question and for that answers, as opposed to I have one question and two answers, and I'm asking someone, random labeler, to say which of these answer is better. And this is now from information retrieval field for decades, and it's called gold standard when people evaluate the answer to their own question.
So I want to be working on something else as we're listening to this. It's all pertaining to this particular thing, and then I'll share it with you guys once it's all finished. Once again,
when an expert evaluates someone else's questions, and the answer is called the silver, if I remember correct. But the second thing, people who give votes, who vote, in our case, are intrinsically motivated. We are not asking them to vote, right? They can choose not to vote. Only people who want to vote.
Relative to companies that pay humans
you to vote, or you provide other kind of incentives, like, if you vote more, we can give you more resources or something like that, right? Because you can easily imagine how you can get their wrong incentives, which are not necessarily aligned. When I say wrong incentives, they are not necessarily aligned with increasing the voting quality.
One of the things that strikes me as I hear you guys talk about the design of the platform is that unlike these other paid services where you can just essentially hand out cash or incentives, when you have somebody intrinsically testing, that the usage of the quality of a model, that starts to look more and more like software testing. So 15 years ago when software systems were starting to be deployed to the internet, they were bugs, they were insecure, they were unstable, they were unreliable. And so as an industry, we developed the idea of unit tests and CI/CD and A/B testing. And today, software systems go through a sort of fairly reliable set of checks before they get deployed to production. Am I wrong, or should I think about that as a pretty good analogy that we should want, if we'd like the progress of AI, the arc of AI progress to head towards more and more reliability, then we actually want model developers and AI developers to be testing their systems more before they get released to the world?
So I think that's kind of when we started, and this is another thing about exciting. It's about, we do believe, and you can see right now, one of the main challenges of adopting AI in a wide area of scenarios, it's actually reliability, especially if you look at enterprises, right? Is this answer correct or not? That's kind of fundamental, right? And that's, like you said, it's very similar with software systems. And for software systems, we develop, like you said, this kind of long and sophisticated testing processes, right? CI/CD and so forth, right? So you should think about that. You need something like similar for these models. Right now, are basically, tell the truth, like almost static benchmarks, right? This is what we are doing, right? You start training your model, and when the loss rate plateaus, you start testing checkpoints, right? And you have, 60, 70, 80 kind of benchmark, and you look at that in a spreadsheet, see which checkpoint is doing better, whatever, then you can merge them. This is what happens, right? Today, right? But like we discussed, if you really are going to build your application for humans, okay, you can still test on your static benchmarks. Nothing wrong with that. Very valuable. But you also want to test your models, your checkpoints on Chatbot Arena for all the reasons we mentioned during this discussion. Yeah, so ideally you want Arena to be, as a limit, part of your CI/CD for training the models.
We spent a bunch of time talking about how Arena was born and how the big idea, at least the theoretical idea, is that to unlock more reliability in AI, we need more testing of AI. So let's spend a little bit of time.
Yeah, that's true. In order to make it more reliable, there needs to be more testing, which you don't hear many people talk about, that you can just plug and play. When you can't really plug and play, you should plug it in and test it, evaluate.
Going deeper on the practical realities of making that possible. What are the hardest challenges when it comes to actually building the best testing platform to make AI more reliable?
Arena is a very interesting platform. It's unique, and it's kind of like N of one at the moment. And so there's a number of technical challenges that are actually quite exciting. We're always looking to improve the platform, both from the methodological side and from the infrastructure side. And what makes it unique is that it's this combination of AI, machine learning, converting evaluations into learning algorithms, like reinforcement learning side of things, plus pretty large scale infrastructure. A lot of people don't know this, but Chatbot Arena is used by 1 million plus monthly users. We get tens of thousands of votes on a daily basis. We have over 150 million conversations that have been had on the platform. It's massive. And it's the leading platform for these kind of subjective real world evaluations continuing to grow. So the infrastructure side is actually quite challenging. And then the question is, we have this unprecedented data set. how can we use it and leverage it maximally in order to actually target what we want, which is like the most granular possible evaluations and measurements of model performance.
Why is that hard? Why is granularity hard?
Well, granularity is challenging because fundamentally the questions you're asking when you talk about granularity is, how does it work for this specific individual, or this specific prompt, or this specific use case? That is a hard question to answer. Why? It's because, you Anj, come to the platform. You ask 3 questions and you vote on one of them. How am I supposed to tell which model's best for you? It's like a sparse problem where what happens is that, there's a big matrix of users and queries, and the number of queries is infinite that the user could possibly ask, and the number of users is very large, and they've only asked 3 of them. How are you supposed to learn which model is best for that specific user? Well, you have to do something creative. And the methodology for that, it relates to all these sort of like core topics that are very like deep in machine learning statistics, recommendation systems, so on and so forth. But they come into kind of a new light when you think about language. So, one example of a problem that, we're working on towards the future is personalization. How am I supposed to create a personalized leaderboard for you? Let's say I have your prompt history and a few votes. Well, in order to run a regression that's just for you, I probably need hundreds of votes. It's just going to be too high variance unless I have that much data. But I'm never going to collect that much data on a user. Or like only for the most power users am I going to collect that much data at the moment. So we need a way that we can train models that look at your interaction history and then can compare you to other users and pool between users so that you can create leaderboards for, specific people, categories of people, so on and so forth. That is a challenging and interesting problem. And you need to do it using only this sort of limited information that we have, which is binary preference data. How do you do that? Well, it's a cool problem. It's a hard problem. And it's one that we have taken steps towards solving. And it's not just personalization. What about if I want to value the data? What if I want to tell you which data points are high signal? Which users are high taste? What if I want to say, Anj, he's fantastic at, bioinformatics, but when you ask him about history, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. Or what if you want to say, hey, this person right here, they're a local expert in this particular topic, and I really should upweight their opinions, let's say. Or this person's just voting noise. How do I, take them out? We need to be able to do tasks like these, and they're fundamentally hard because of the structure of the data that we collect. But they're also very exciting methodologically, and we keep making progress on them, which is part of the reason why it fuels us. And it's all enabled by this massive infrastructure and platform. It needs to be done at scale. It needs to be done very quickly. And, Wei Lin is kind of the expert on this, and he should speak to more of that.
Yeah. So before we go into infrastructure, I think one related note on all sorts of problems we are, looking at, like ML problem, which is also related to recommendation systems in the early days, where people try to figure out the cold start problem, right? You only have very few data points per user, but you are trying to do something, personalized recommendations for them. For
or
products.
Netflix,
yeah, for movies. What do people like? And as we, lean toward like a more personalized world, where like companies try to build AI products for consumer, everyone, that leverage, all these user histories, prompts that.
Just pausing it because I think I'm gonna need to pause it.
Model has memories now, so there's quite of new methodology need to be developed, and in particular in this kind of like evaluation context.
It seems like there's 2 or 3 emerging frontiers of AI progress, right? Relative to 2 or 3 years ago, where models were pretty simple. The vast majority of questions people had about the quality or performance of the models were mostly about in-context learning, right? I give the model a couple of examples. How good is it at predicting the next token or word in that sequence? And it was a pretty simplistic measure. Fast forward 2-3 years now, models have gotten extraordinary. Models clearly look more and more like systems. One of the systems improvements that you've described is memory, right? So relative to 5-6 months ago, when most AI assistants like ChatGPT didn't have memory, but now do, people are starting to notice a discernible verticalization of the model and the systems layer, right? So famously, OpenAI has spent a ton of time post-training their latest model, 4.1 or 4.5 or whatever it was, on with the assumption built in that the model has access to the user's memory and context, right? When you have, how do you solve the problem of evaluating a model that where the lines are blurring between model, system, application? This is turning into a full stack sort of product experience relative to a model that, let's say, doesn't have all of those, right? Because these relative to 2-3 years ago, the side-by-side taste test was naively looked easier to do because it looked like Coke versus Pepsi or whatever, right? Now it looks like, a dessert versus an entree versus whatever. I'm doing a terrible job of the analogies, but you get what I'm saying, right? ChatGPT today, for example, has memory. Claude doesn't. right? These are two consumer apps that look very similar on the surface, but under the hood, fairly different. The implementations are diverging, and yet on Arena, they're evolved side by side, right? So what does that future look like? How do you guys disentangle the fact that the stack is becoming more and more verticalized and integrated across model, system, interface, application, but Arena today is largely side by side evaluation of models that people are used to thinking of as basically symmetric system.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of, again, evaluation would ever become, more challenging and more specific to your applications. Just like, all software systems need its own CI/CD pipeline. Right. That's very, very different, from each other. I think the same thing would happen to all the AI products as well. So our belief is like, in order to, collect data or evaluation that really like means something that matters to us, to the app builder or to user, we have to build a real world environment for everyone to test, to use it, give us real feedback. That's also why we are like, and then it's a combination of challenge of ML, product design, and engineering infrastructure. Because ultimately we are already serving millions of users. We're going to serve tens of millions of users, right? How can we design a product that, people really love to use? And then in the same time, that's the most organic feedback that we could collect from different kind of users, including memory. So what if we have memory in Arena? That kind of like, applications testing, like really like the long context capability of the model to reason about the past, and then to have potentially the RAG system to retrieve relevant, informations from the user's past history in order to create a more personalized content for users, or more personalized, leaderboards for users that's help them to choose what's the best AI for their use cases.
When ChatGPT has memory built in, but Claude doesn't, how would that actually work in production when I show up to the site and I'm trying to evaluate these models side by side? Both are serving the model via an API. Does that mean on the Arena side, you have to recreate memory and then abstract that away as a shared service that all the models consume? How would that implementation work?
Yeah, so I think increasingly we're going to go beyond just single model. That the model has ability to connect to different source of information, you would say, like context.
The Search Arena is one example of this.
So Search Arena is like we launched a couple months ago. Is basically Arena just specific to evaluate models that has internet access, web data access, right? And in that case, model is not just model itself. It has to be in combination of other components. And same thing happened to memory, right? You have another component which is retrieving relevant information from user history, and then this history is actually richer, like not only just prompt that has all the battle between different models, comparison data, and then users express preference. So that kind of like more like, and then it could be also multimodal, right? Can be like image, can be like video, or PDF, right? People upload long document, that kind of stuff. So all these kind of like different contexts, different modality of data, how can we leverage them in order to create more personal experience and then evaluate? That would be like very interesting challenge.
Yeah, I would say there's basically two ways that we're moving forward. The first is the platform is going to continue to evolve, for sure. We're going to keep creating new arenas. We're going to keep improving the arena to integrate things like an artifacts component and things like memory and so on and so forth. And the second is integrations. At the end of the day, if someone wants to evaluate their app, like we should be able to provide them a toolkit that integrates with our services to do that.
So let's say I'm building a code editor.
Yeah.
But I'd like to understand which one of the 17 models out there are best for my users.
Exactly.
What does that look? I use an Arena SDK.
Exactly.
Got it. And
that's exactly right.
And so what would that look like? My users would generate a bunch of interactions that then the Arena SDK is serving on the Arena site to run side by side, or is that eval actually happening in my app?
I think it can happen in context. So what you can do is you can have some kind of a gateway that allows people to access all sorts of different models, even maybe the ones that they didn't handpick themselves, but the cutting edge ones that maybe they don't even have access to them. Maybe they're even pre-release, right? And then what we can do is on our side, use all the experience that we've built on sampling, data tools, training models, this huge data set that we've collected that has all these multi-provider comparisons to do things like...
I think I have to stop and talk. I'm reading. I'm working on an article that will then be broken down into tweets, LinkedIn posts, Substack posts, whatever, about personalized arenas.
Like choose what the best model is for your users, understand how all the different models perform, all the cost benefit trade-offs, the Pareto curve of cost of performance of different models. All that stuff is stuff that we can instrument, and we can do it using in-context feedback. So let's say somebody says, hey, let's hook into a thumbs up, thumbs down button, pass that back to the Arena SDK. Well, we can look at that. And using that information, we can produce leaderboards for that organization. We're the experts in doing that, right? We've been doing this for years. Things like prompt to leaderboard and various technologies, D3. Yeah, so we're building a project now that we call data-driven debugging, D3. It's a little farther out. It'll come in a couple months. But the fundamental premise of that is that pairwise comparison feedback is not the only kind of feedback that we can use to construct leaderboards. We can construct leaderboards with any form of feedback. And because of that, we can hook in not just to pop up pairwise preference comparisons for whatever company, which is of course something that we can do. But instead, what if I want to rank code models in part on how many times the code is copied
or accepted?
Code changes accepted. How many, what's the edit distance between the code that the model produced and the code that the human ended up sort of shipping?
So that's interesting. You're saying we're moving from a world where the primary signal that is used to figure out whether to improve an AI model is sort of very explicit thumbs up, thumbs down binary preference. You see a future where every interaction I have within a product, engagement, retention, down to a GUI interaction, can help tell the model what to improve.
Absolutely.
So
that's exactly the kind of stuff that we can loop into our methodology that we've been developing and generate useful feedback for people to continue improving their models. If you want to create code that people are going to use, make sure that people are using it and that the edit distance is low and that people accept your changes. Okay. If you want to build an agent like a Devin, that's going to be your software engineer, how many of these PRs end up getting merged? This is the sort of stuff that we're building the technology that gives you very, very rich insights into. And I think, by virtue of the fact that we're developing this new methodology, we think we have an edge to be able to provide people that kind of service.
You talked earlier about prompt to leaderboard. One of the things that surprised me when I looked at the repo, it's an open source repo, is how well the model performed on Arena. Can you actually just walk through what happened when you guys recap what it is and then what happened when you actually deployed it on Arena?
So I'll get a little bit into technical detail here because I think it's cool. So prompt to leaderboard, what does it do? If you look at the Chatbot Arena leaderboard, it's Bradley Terry coefficients. Prompt to leaderboard is a technology that we built that allows you to take a prompt and then produce Bradley Terry coefficients for every model that are specific to that prompt. Okay? The Bradley Terry coefficients are a leaderboard. Higher is better. It means you're more likely to win a battle. So what's the natural next step from producing a leaderboard? Well, let's make a router. Anj asks me a question. I'm going to produce a leaderboard just for that question. And then how about I route his question to the model that's on the top of the leaderboard? It turns out that when you do this, when you train a prompt to leaderboard model, which is let's say a 7 billion parameter model, and then you use it to route Anj's questions on the Arena and everybody's questions, that model does better than any of the constituent models that were used in the router by a pretty substantial margin. Now, here's another thing that's yet more interesting. Because the Bradley Terry coefficients have a particular parametric form and a statistical meaning, you can use them in downstream optimization problems. So one example of an optimization problem is a router. Maximize performance subject to cost constraints. So the router can be, for example, a randomized router that chooses between different models. It has a random policy that chooses, hey, Anj asked me a question. I'm with 50% probability I'm going to route here. With 50% probability I'm going to route here. And I'm going to do so in such a way that my average cost is, 1 cent. And I'm going to maximize my performance subject to that. Now, if you trace the performance, the best performance that any individual model can give you as part of the router as a function of cost, that's 2x worse than the router. In other words, the router is giving you double the bang for your buck in terms of performance per cost. If you want to achieve an Arena score of 1280 using the router, it'll cost you half as much as it costs you to use any individual model. That's amazing. What it means is that you're taking advantage of the heterogeneity in performance of these models across different parts of prompt space in order to properly route them. And by virtue of the fact that it has this statistical interpretation, you can cost constrain it too. And that's why prompt to leaderboard is interesting, is that because we believe it's a fundamental first step towards addressing this routing problem in a principled way. And from our perspective, it's the right way to do routing. If you want to do routing to maximize preference, even internally at OpenAI, they're doing these A/B tests, right? If you want to maximize the sort of feedback that you get there and the engagement, then you should be using a strategy like prompt to leaderboard. So, our hope is that this sort of thing would make it easier for them to avoid the dropdown and that they can actually implement it in their own product. I'm sure that they have strategies of their own, but maybe this can be helpful to them too.
Let's talk a little bit about, you said that experience will look different over time. The Arena experience will look different than ChatGPT. Let's talk a little bit about the roadmap. What are the biggest things that you guys are working on over the next few months? And then let's go longer term.
Yeah, well, two that we've already mentioned are personalization and a leaderboard of users. Right? Can we get people, first of all, to like figure out which models they like best and sort of lean into that experience, incentivize them to give us better votes, come here for their personal leaderboards and their personal metrics, and then allow them to drill down really deep in that.
And in that case, we align the interests of individuals and the platform as a whole, because you don't want to mess up your personal leaderboard. Just like how people these days, when they use social media, they don't like a random post, because if they do that, then their feed will be messed up, right? So it's like, oh, I will be more careful voting. I'll be more careful looking at all these different models, sensors, and so on, which we believe collectively we will create a better, even more higher quality arena.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then on the note of a user leaderboard, can we value the data in such a way that allows people to know where they stand in terms of what kind of questions they're asking, how useful they are? We think people are going to love that. It's such a fun thing to be able to see that in terms of math, I'm asking the best questions. I would love that. I would love if I was asking the best statistics questions in the world. And I think people will use that and think, hey, I want to be on the top. And so can we continue to align the incentives? And by the way, once we do that, it'll make it much more, valuable. Make the leaderboard much more valuable, because it'll mean that we sort of start removing the noise from people that might be sort of, oh, I don't know what these buttons are, click. And instead, people are getting really intentional, really high taste votes, identifying who those people are, and maybe even being able to personalize so carefully that we can produce leaderboards for different, types of people. That would be incredible.
And then on the flip side of it is like, we as a platform has a bit more visibility into who are those users and how do we even customize the distribution that, on the flip side, is model developer care, or developers, or developer at large cares, right? I wanted to say, oh, I want to test my AI or my, system in, developers in Japan, let's say, right? And then can we have the ability to kind of like customize that kind of distribution to target what are the most, meaningful distributions that reflect your use cases?
One of the things that you guys have been pretty vocal about is open source. I think from day one, LM Arena has open sourced prompts, votes, a chunk of the data that's being generated on the platform.
I think we do every week probably updates on the leaderboard, right? And then all the code infrastructures that we process the data is published as open source, and also research, blog, paper, and then including prompt leaderboard, we publish the paper, open source the models, the code, and everything, because we believe that this is critical in terms of building trust with the community, and also really build the foundation of this that we can enable more and more value on top of it. Right. So for adoption reason, for trust, and then for collaborations.
So as you guys have made the transition from being a research project and now being a company, what are the most important values to you guys to create and hold at the company as you guys grow out the team, as the project grows?
Absolutely. Well, we are very, very focused on neutrality, innovation, trust. We come from an academic background, and we want to maintain the culture of this is a project, it's a community-focused project, it's going to continue to grow. Yes, it's going to be a company. The company is going to support the project that we've already built and allow it to grow. Yes, it's going to continue to change. It's going to change for the better. Right? We're going to keep improving it. We're going to keep publishing papers. We're going to keep releasing open source. We're going to keep releasing open data. Right? That's all going to be part of our culture. And it goes both ways, because that's the way that you recruit the best. The best people don't want to hole up at a company and develop a bunch of proprietary technology that, is never going to be released. And, it's just going to sort of stay in the annals of their nearest neighbors within the company. And they're the only ones that are going to know. We want the world to know what the best ways are of evaluating these models and accelerating the ecosystem. Releasing this data is also a big part of our trust. If people want to ask the question, hey, how are models performing on the arena? Why are they performing well? Go look at the data. That's what we did with Llama. Right? When people have questions about Llama, we just released the data. Easy, right? Just go look. And we plan on doing things like this for the lifetime of our company, right? That's how we're going to recruit the best researchers that are going to help us develop a methodology. That's how we're going to develop the best engineers who care about the whole ecosystem, not just one company. And ultimately, that's how we're going to develop the best products. That's how we're going to become central to the space. We already are, but we're going to cement it, is by remaining open and neutral.
How would you resolve the tension that often exists when there are people who are concerned that as AI gets more and more prevalent, right, as AI systems start being deployed in pretty mission-critical industries like defense, we talked about, healthcare and so on, that in fact there's an argument to be made that these systems should be closed source and evaluated in a fairly locked down environment, as opposed to being openly tested in this manner, and this is actually irresponsible. How do you think about that cultural tension?
Listen, I'm not an expert in national security, but I think an evaluation platform like ours has many different ways of being used. If they want to evaluate it publicly, they can. If they need a private deployment, we can probably also do that for them. You know, it just depends on the sort of level of national security risk, which is way above my pay grade. But for any of these things, you're going to need sort of these subjective community-driven evaluations. That's for sure. If things are going to be deployed, you're going to need real people testing.
Yeah, and also like there's a point when you develop the model, and this model is going to be used by broadly the public. There has to be like a phase of testing it, right? And then what we are building is like, you know, to bridge this gap between the lab building something that's like, you know, the frontier research, and the world would use it as a large. Right. You need an environment for you to test in a sense that it's a more controlled environment with the people that you know, the distribution you want to customize, you want to understand the preference. There's a need for a platform like this to exist, and want to serve it.
Yeah, could you talk a little bit about Red Team Arena?
Yeah, so for example, this real-world testing idea of Arena can be applied to many different applications, like we discussed, right? From chatbot to web dev to different modality, image, that kind of stuff, and as well as red teaming, because red teaming at its core is like, you know, a bunch of people try to jailbreak the models to see if it's, you know, really faithfully following what the model has been like instructed to do or graded to do, right? So these days, many frontier labs been publishing kind of like a model spec, like an idea, like how models should behave in this way, in that way, right? And then, but how do you make sure model follow that instructions? You need real world testing again. You need red teaming. You need a group of people knowledgeable in this space to help, right? So again, this can be community driven too, because there's a group of, you know, vibrant community of jailbreakers. They want to help. And then they wanted to also like, they test it for fun as well. Like, so in Red Team Arena, we have a leaderboard, not just for model, but for user, for jailbreaker, who is the best jailbreakers that can like identify issues for all different models. So that very particular, the very, you know, idea of real world testing still apply here, and it still can deliver value to.
Is it fair to say that if I wanted to understand the security or the safety sort of risks in a model, I could go to Red Team Arena and look at the evals that the models are generating over there? How does Red Team Arena actually work in practice to improve the security and reliability of these models?
Yeah, for sure. So I think same as how we understand chatbot, web, that kind of thing, there will be many different applications people are trying to build on top of the models. Right. There's a custom service, that's customer services, or like, you know, retriever systems, that kind of stuff, right? You want model to behave in a certain way, and you want control. Right. And then in Red Team Arena, the idea will be like, why don't we build an environment to simulate that application? So for example, can we build an environment to simulate customer services where, you know, the model is instructed to not give certain, not take certain actions. And then if you are as a jailbreaker trying to break the model. Right. So that kind of like signals that we will be getting in terms of like real world testing jailbreaking will be reflective to the particular use cases that people care.
By the way, Red Team Arena right now is still a little bit of a prototype. We're continuing to work on it, but it's interesting to see, you know, people can, it's not necessarily the model that's like most, like refuses most to answer these like queries that people ask necessarily better. Some people want a model that's more controllable. Some people want a model that's going to say whatever they want. Some people want a model that's going to be completely safe and you can use it, you know, PG-13 or, you know, rated G. You know, that's okay, as long as people have the choice.
So as we start to wrap up here, you know, one question that a lot of people ask is what does the world look like, especially the world of evaluation and testing, as we go from a pre-training world to a post-training world and a world of models to agents, right? In some sense, it seems like you guys were actually a little bit ahead of the curve, where Arena has always been an environment for agents more than, you know, a set of static evals. So as people start, as agents get better at long horizon tasks and tool calling and so on, this future where a ton of work in the economy is done largely by, you know, fully end-to-end automated systems, does Arena have to change in any fundamental way for that future? Or does it largely look the same?
Yeah, I think as we've been talking about, what's the fundamental? The fundamental is organic real-world testing with feedback. That's not going to change. I can tell you that is not going to change. Will we have to adapt the UI? Yes. Will we have to improve the product? Yes. Will we have to launch new products for evaluation? Yes. Will we have to develop new methodology? Yes. Does the fundamentals change? I think no. I think the reality is, if you want to test your model for real world use, you have to subject it to real world use. You have to collect feedback from real world use, and that's it. So we're really excited about what the future has to hold there. We don't actually even know ourselves where the product is going to evolve over the next 5.
All right. That's it for me tonight. I'm going to be focusing on this project. Yeah. All right. Peace.